My name is Greg. I'm here, you're here, we're all here for the love of music. And today, I gotta roll my sleeves up for this review, guys. Today is a very special review for me because I'm gonna be talking about one of my personal favorite singer-songwriters. Judging by the title of the video, obviously I'm talking about Mr. Steven Wilson. Now, if any of you don't know Steven Wilson, which a lot of people actually don't, he's a British singer-songwriter, producer, composer, multi-instrumentalist. His career has spanned over 30 years. He has a pretty prolific background, a pretty prolific back catalog of projects, albums, and associated acts that he has worked with over these past years. And if you've never heard of Steven Wilson, that's most likely due to the fact that almost all of his work has stayed out of the mainstream. The Daily Telegraph actually describes him as the most successful British artist you've never heard of. And, I would essentially agree with that. Like I said, most people, at least in the United States, haven't heard of Steven Wilson. Now, as I mentioned, Steven Wilson has a very admirable career, most notably in the progressive genre. Now, I'd like to do a little bit of background on Steven Wilson before I get into this review. I feel that it's just necessary. And, he is my favorite singer-songwriter who is currently still putting out music. Now, this album that I'm going to be reviewing, called To the Bone, is actually Steven Wilson's fifth studio LP as a solo artist, since he's gone solo, I should say. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, Steven Wilson actually formed the band called Porcupine Tree, and it actually started out as a solo project. He was just using the name Porcupine Tree. He later actually formed a band, I guess. He brought on other members, I think mostly for touring, and then they actually started making albums together. Now, if anybody watching is familiar with Porcupine Tree, this new album, To the Bone, is very sonically similar to the late 90s, early 2000s Porcupine Tree sound. Most specifically, I'm talking about the album Stupid Dream, Lightbulb Sun, and a little bit of In Absentia. But I think it's mostly the previous two. And on especially Stupid Dream, there are a lot of poppier moments, and I hear a lot of that on this new album. To the Bone is not a very heavy album, which on all of Steven Wilson's previous solo efforts, there have been some heavier moments. Not as much on this newer album. As I already mentioned, Steven Wilson is involved with several other acts, several other projects aside from his solo output right now, and Porcupine Tree, who is indefinitely finished as of 2009 when Steven Wilson began his solo career. But some other acts he's been involved with are Blackfield, No Man, Bass Communion, Incredible Exploding Mindfuck, and another one of my favorite bands, Opeth. And I'm pretty sure there are some other acts off the top of my head I can't remember, but those are the ones I think that are most notable. Now, Steven's new album, To the Bone, is a follow-up to his critically acclaimed 2015 Hand Cannot Erase. That was his fourth solo effort. It was actually my favorite album of 2015. Yes, I think it's better than To Pimp a Butterfly, but that's just my personal opinion, right? And in 2016, just last year, Steven released an EP, which was called 4.5, and it was just kind of a mix of some tracks that didn't make Hand Cannot Erase and didn't make his 2013 LP, The Raven That Refused to Sing. And The Raven is also, it's either my favorite or it's in my top 3 from 2013. But in my opinion, his 2013 and 2015 albums are some of the best albums I have personally ever listened to. So if you have not listened to either of these, I highly, highly recommend them. But they are going to sound different than To the Bone. And To the Bone is also different in the sense that it is not really a conceptual album. It has a few themes throughout, but The Raven and Hand Cannot Erase were purely conceptual, which is one thing I love about Steven Wilson. I also want to note that Steven Wilson brought back Israeli singer Ninet Tayeb. I believe that's how her name is pronounced. He featured her on 2 tracks on his Hand Cannot Erase album. The tracks were Routine and Ancestral. Both tracks were, I would say, in my top 5 favorite tracks of 2015. Coincidentally, both of those tracks were the ones that featured Ninet, and he brought her back. She's on a few tracks on To The Bone. I think she does some backing vocals on a few other tracks, but 2 tracks she's actually featured as an accompanying vocalist. I digress, but I just want to mention that I had the pleasure of seeing Steven Wilson live early in 2016. He was on tour for his Hand Cannot Erase album, and I actually saw him in Chicago. I think it was back in March 2016. It was a over 3-hour concert. He played the entire album, and then he selected songs from Porcupine Tree and his other solo projects. And just to be, keep it short, it was the best concert I've ever been to, hands down. And Ninet was actually on tour with him, and I actually got pretty lucky because there were 2 Chicago shows. My wife and I actually went to the second show. The first show, the night before ours, Steven actually had to cancel because he had lost his voice. He had been sick. So at our show, he had some of his voice back, but Ninet actually sang a lot of the tracks along with Steven, and she actually sang a few tracks on her own that she, normally didn't sing. And, this woman has an amazing voice. So be sure to check out those other albums that I mentioned. Check out the 2 tracks from Hand Cannot Erase, Ancestral and Routine, if you want to check out, what Ninet contributed. The first single that was released from To The Bone is called Pariah. Ninet is featured on this track. This was actually the only single I checked out from this album. I think Steven, he either released 4 or 5 singles in total. But I don't like to really check out singles in most cases, because I want to experience the entire album, at once. And, I heard Pariah, and I had to check one out. It was beautiful. It's one of the best songs on the album. Ninet is featured. It's a duet between Steven and Ninet, and I'll discuss it a little bit later. All right, To The Bone is 11 tracks. It's just shy of an hour. This album was actually released on Caroline International. That's the label. As far as I know, every other album Steven Wilson has released has been through K-Scope. So he's gone with a different label. He always produces his own albums, but he brought on Paul Stacey to help him produce this album. It sounds beautiful, as always. This album still has progressive rock moments, but Steven Wilson tried something new here on To The Bone. He wanted a more poppy sound. You're going to find a lot more poppier moments on this album. But like I said, there are still those progressive rock moments. So it's not a complete stray from the genre, but it's incorporating more pop, a little more electronic. So going into this, I was pretty curious on how he was going to do it. He did announce that he was going to be incorporating more pop into the album. So I'm just going to talk about what I felt and, how this album shaped up against its predecessors, the 2013 and 2015 albums, which I love so much. Now, before I get into the tracks, I actually want to read a couple quotes from Steven Wilson about the album. So I'm going to read those here for you, so just bear with me. In his own words, Steven says, "This album is about my love of songwriting and isn't weighed down by a conceptual element, which has been a strong part of my music for the last few years." As I said. Steven says, "My 5th record is in many ways inspired by the hugely ambitious progressive rock records that I loved in my youth." Specifically, he mentions Peter Gabriel's So, Kate Bush's Hounds of Love, Talk Talk's Color of Spring, and Tears for Fears, Seeds of Love. Steven goes on to say that lyrically, the album's 11 tracks veer from the paranoid chaos of the current era in which truth can be apparently a flexible notion. Observations of the everyday lives of refugees, terrorists, and religious fundamentalists. These are some of the, themes or different things that are on some of the tracks. and a welcome shot of some of the most joyous, wide-eyed escapism I've created in my career so far. And he says, something for all the family. So I guess he's just saying that he's expanding on his thought process. He's bringing in a little bit more of a balance of other genres to his album here. And finally, Stephen says, we live in an age in which truth is so often twisted and perverted to serve different agendas. It's filtered through so many things, whether it's your race, gender, politics, or religion. It seems to me that's not truth at all. It's your perception. And I think this is a perfect segue into the album, because the album is about truth. It's about perception. And thinking about that, that's what music is about. Just to digress a second, music is subjective. Music is about your perception. Or I guess I could say art in general. And, music, just like film, just like theater, just like paintings, music is subjective. Each person can look at a painting or see a film or listen to an album and get something completely different out of it, which is, the beauty of music. Now, the opening track is the title track, To the Bone. There is some spoken word right at the beginning, which I feel is a great way to kick this album off. The spoken word is, once we've made sense of our world, we want to go fuck up everyone else's because his or her truth doesn't match mine. But this is the problem. Truth is individual calculation, which means because we all have different perspectives, there isn't one singular truth, is there? And this kind of just reinforces what I just said. But in a sense, what Stephen is trying to get across here is he's saying that we all calculate a truth, or we all believe in a truth, whether, and it may be a different truth than somebody else. So how do we know what is actually true? We all have a different worldview. We all have a different perception. I'm not just talking about music or art, but, everyday things, religion, politics, etc., family values, morals. What one person considers to be true may be completely false and offensive to somebody else. So I guess what Stephen is saying is, how do we really know what the actual truth is? And that's kind of what this album explores. And it's taken me a good 4 listens through to completely appreciate how Stephen is using, this album to explore this concept. But mind you, it's not actually a conceptual album. And basically the theme on the title track, To the Bone, is Stephen basically saying, getting down to the bone, trying to find out the truth. He says, don't you want to see what's at the core? The next track is Nowhere Now. It's one of the popular tracks on the album. It has one of the catchiest choruses, but I love the chorus. And the chorus goes, here above the clouds, I am free of all the crowds, and I float above the stars, and I feel the rush of love. Looking down on earth, it is luminous, observe. Stephen is saying that so many people don't realize how beautiful our world is or how good their lives are. We need to take a step back and just look and see. And I guess he's trying to say, be humble. Now, as I stated before, the only single I did check out was the song Pariah. If you don't know, Pariah is another word for an outcast. And this is the track where, the first track that features Ninet, she and Stephen do essentially a duet on here. They each have a verse, and I think they sing together a bit on the chorus. And Pariah essentially is a song about a man who, he's thinking about how tired he is of the world. He's kind of given up on other people. He's kind of given up on himself. He's tired of social media. Stephen mentioned, there's a line, it says, I'm tired of Facebook, and I'm tired of my failing health. I'm tired of everyone, and that includes myself. And then Ninet has a beautiful, she does the chorus, and she says, so Pariah, you'll begin again. Take comfort in me, it will take time. Yeah, she does it a lot better. But basically what she's saying, she's telling this man, whether it's just the man, her friend, her husband, I'm not sure. She's saying that it'll take time to heal. I'm here, confide in me, but it's going to take time. So essentially I think this track is just speaking to anybody who has those same sentiments, that you're tired of the world, you're tired of social media, you're tired of all the negativity. Embrace the ones you love or the ones who are close to you. And, it'll take time, but things will get better. Now, the most Porcupine Tree sounding track on the album, in my opinion, is another one of the singles, which I didn't check out initially. It's The Same Asylum as Before. Specifically, there's a riff on this track that it is different, but it reminded me so much of the guitar on Porcupine Tree's song Prodigal off of In Absentia. As soon as I heard it, I was like, man, and it's, it's like, man, I miss me some PT, but this is great stuff. And The Same Asylum as Before is one of those tracks where Steven's message isn't completely clear, at least in my opinion. I think he's kind of talking about indoctrination, and Steven specifically keeps repeating my eggshell mind on the track. It's repeated several times, and to me that's just saying that the mind is a fragile thing, especially the mind of a younger person, a child, someone who hasn't reached the age of reason. But it also is saying that, an idea or an inception can completely change somebody's perspective, somebody's outlook, somebody's truth. And I'm trying to always remember the perception and the truth theme on this album. And Steven says it's tough to live here in the same asylum as before. And I don't think he's specifically talking about like an insane asylum, but the asylum of your own mind. It's tough to see another truth or accept another truth or to admit that your perspective or your own truth is wrong, and to move on to, when evidence presents itself, it's hard to to see that, but it's enlightening. Now I'm going to skip ahead a few tracks. The other track on here that is most Porcupine Tree sounding to me is the track People Who Eat Darkness. And this track was really tough for me to kind of get a grasp on what Steven was saying, because this track it's pretty dark. It's got some pretty dark overtones and some lyrics. The opening line in this track is, I live in the flat next door and I can hear you fuck your girlfriend through the wall, but the only thing we share is the slightest nod as we're passing on the stairs. And Steven goes on to explain a few more encounters that I'm assuming he is having with these other people, the people who eat darkness. The chorus on this track is very catchy, despite its very depressing and dark and melancholic feel. And I would like to say that is something that I love about Steven Wilson's music, is that he can turn melancholy into something beautiful, something catchy. A lot of Porcupine Tree's music is, steeped heavily in melancholia. A lot of his own, just about everything that Steven Wilson is, involved with is a bit depressing or darker or, like I said, rooted in melancholy. I think there's actually a quote from Steven Wilson, maybe I'll try to find it, where he talks about why he writes music this way, why he prefers to write music this way. I digress. The chorus is, well, you lost control and your kids became confused among the powder kegs with nothing left to lose. So now your chickens are coming home to roost. And that last line is essentially an idiom, meaning that, your actions have consequences. What you say or do can essentially come back and haunt you. It can rebound. And that's kind of what this track is saying, that I'm still not sure who the people who eat darkness. I'm not really sure who exactly he's talking about here. Another one of the singles on this album is the track Permeating, which is definitely the most poppy track on the album. And I really don't have a lot to say about this track. Steven Wilson actually made a comment about it. I'm going to read it. He says, Permeating is about the idea of a crystallized moment of happiness. We all have certain memories of great joy that comfort us. We draw from them as a well of positivity when we need them. But this is probably my least favorite track on the album. It's not a bad track, and it has nothing to do with it being poppy. I don't mind Steven Wilson's poppier stuff. The track just didn't feel like it really fit in on the album to me. And it's a pretty short track. I think it's just over 3 minutes, and it just kind of fades off at the end. In my opinion, it almost felt like Steven Wilson was pushing a little too much to just try to get a poppy sound on this album, and he threw this track in there. But it just didn't fit with me, and I guess this track is my only real gripe with the album. It just felt out of place. But following this track is actually the shortest track on the album. It's called Blank Tapes. It's the other track where Ninet is featured, and it's a very dark but beautiful little piece where Ninet and Steven each have a verse, and they're talking about nothing is left except the blank tapes in your car. I think, this is just talking about loss or love hardships, love loss. On the track Song of I, which is another one of the singles, Steven Wilson goes over several different things that he's given up. And when I first heard it, he was saying, I've given up alcohol, I've given up this unhealthy lifestyle with you in mind, is what he keeps saying. And at first I thought he was just talking about he's given up these bad lifestyle choices for somebody. But after listening to it several times and knowing that Steven Wilson isn't really a family man, he's chosen not to get married, not to have kids, so he can pursue his musical career. And I kind of changed my perception on this track. And I think this track is actually an ode to his own devotion to music. And what I think he's saying is that he's given up the lifestyle of having a family. He's given up partying. He's given up staying out late. He's giving up alcohol and unhealthy choices so that he can focus on his career. And once I made this connection, I guess, I liked this song a lot more. At first I was like, it's another song about, love and relationships. But I think it's actually, in my opinion, him saying, like I said, I've given up everything for music. And he's kind of telling the world that, like, hey, I've given all this up. This is who I am. The Song of I. Now, the final two tracks on To The Bone are actually pretty powerful. The longest track is the track Detonation, which clocks in at over 9 minutes. It's not necessarily an epic, but, it feels like one, because most of the tracks on this album are, averaging around the 5-minute mark. And this track, I mentioned earlier about terrorists and religious fundamentalists. This track is actually inspired by the Pulse Club, Orlando, Florida massacre that occurred. And the lyrics focus on, this lone wolf religious extremist who ended up murdering, I think it was 49 people because they were gay. And this track is very important for the theme of perception and truth, because basically what Steven is saying, what the lyrics are saying, I guess, is that this person developed a worldview, a mindset that, their God, essentially, is willing them or wanting them to do this, to kill these people because of their sexual orientation. And the lyrics say, and the ones who are given it all, the good looks, the wealth, and the charm, and the innocence, they're going to fall. And it's very poignant. It's very haunting. And then the next verse is, but I will take it back. Whiny God, who the fuck are you? Detonation for the greater good. Sweating, can hear my heart. 'Cause when the world breaks, you will feel the blast. And that verse is pretty powerful, because it's almost like you're vicariously experiencing what happened at that club. And almost Steven paints a pretty poignant picture of, I guess, the thought process of a religious extremist, of a fundamentalist, of somebody who believes that their beliefs, their religion, it's okay to do these, heinous, horrendous acts. And this track has a pretty epic instrumental outro, something that I typically expect on a Steven Wilson album or a Porcupine Tree album. There's usually at least one track where there's a pretty long or pretty laid out instrumental, and it was a beautiful instrumental. Check this out. Now, stepping back a bit to the track Refuge. For the longest time, I thought the track title was Refuge, And then I one day I was like, wait a minute, Refuge has two E's at the end. This is Refuge. And a refuge is like a safe place or a safe location. But this track essentially is a very, very poignant account of, well, not really an account, but lyrically about the life of a refugee. And kind of like on the track Detonation, you're almost vicariously living the life of a refugee on this track. I think this track is essential. I think everybody needs to listen to this track. I have all the lyrics here written down in my notes. When I take notes for these reviews, I'll always write down some lyrics from each track, lyrics I find essential, worth discussing. And literally the whole song, Refuge, is, all the lyrics in this song are pertinent. They're, I can't really leave anything out. It's a story. If you get a chance, listen to the song. It's poignant. It almost brings you to tears. It's not like Routine, in my opinion, but it's definitely the most, heart-wrenching track on the album. And then finally, the closing track, Song of Unborn, I think is Steven Wilson's, one of his best closing tracks, from Porcupine Tree through now. One of the best closing tracks to an album. And just like on the song Refuge, I think that all the lyrics in this track are essential. I've written almost all of them down for this track. I'm not gonna read them all. Essentially, what this track is saying is love yourself, love your life, and live your life to the fullest. Don't be afraid to take risks. On this track, Steven sings, "It's not what you'll possess, it's how you will express the essence of you." And I first heard this and was like, oh, this is so beautiful. It's not the wage you earn, it's about the things you learn and the love that you feel. It's not what you conceal, it's all that you reveal that will make you be you. And it's like, oh, this sounds like some of the stuff, I would hear in a Dr. Seuss book. It's inspirational. It's, I love it. And he says, the perfection of you is not the years you pass. It's about the moments that last. Oh, it's swelling up right now. And this isn't complex, poetic, lyrics, but, this is beautiful stuff. And like I said, despite Steven Wilson's melancholic tones, his darker stuff, his sometimes depressing music, he writes stuff like this that's beautiful, that can be, anyone can find, get something out of, or should be able to. And the track closes with the words, "Forever in you, don't be afraid to die, don't be afraid to be alive, don't be afraid." And, what better way to end this album like that? An album about truth, an album about perception. He's saying, don't be afraid to live. Whatever your truth may be, try to be a good person, but try to live. You only get one life. Step back and observe what you have. Be thankful for what you have. I guess another thing about, To the Bone, I guess he's saying that, along with stepping back, observing, your beautiful world, or what should be a beautiful world, we should try to take care of it so it stays beautiful. That's a whole nother argument, but I digress. But maybe he's saying, try to look into somebody else's eyes. Try to get to the bone of somebody else. See what they're going through. Look through the eyes of a refugee before you judge, before you show any kind of bigotry or racism or anything like that. With all the societal issues and all the shit going on in the world today, like I've said several times this year, this album is relevant. These lyrics are relevant. Thank you, Steven Wilson. This is a beautiful album. I'm still gonna have to listen to it several more times. I can't say that it's better than your Hand Cannot Erase and the Raven albums. Those two I've obviously listened to a lot more, but this one is just, those two are different animals. This one's different. But I applaud you, Steven Wilson. You've done it again. Will this be my favorite album of the year? I can't say at this point. It's definitely going to be, in my top 50. But stay tuned, find out. And, the progressive genre, isn't one that seems to be very popular with critics. Most people, it doesn't seem to get good reviews. There are some critics out there who don't even like Steven Wilson. I'm not gonna mention any names. This kind of material here is why Steven Wilson is arguably my favorite songwriter currently putting out music. One of my favorite songwriters of all time. His work is just relevant. He's not some instrumental maestro. He's a good instrumentalist, but he produces all his own music. He composes it. He goes everywhere around the world. I think he went to Peru for a while during the songwriting process for this album. He lives for his music. He lives for making music. But I think I've rambled enough. Sorry for that. What did you think of this album? Have you checked it out? Have you checked out anything else from Steven Wilson, Porcupine Tree, any of his other associated acts? Let me know what you think in the comments. Is there anything I missed from this album? Is there anything I'm way off on? Let me know in the comments, please. And as I said in the beginning of the video, this review is special to me. I've been able to talk about, like I said, one of my most favorite musicians, favorite producers of music, Mr. Steven Wilson. And To the Bone was definitely one of my most anticipated albums of the year. And nothing is more pleasing, at least to me, than having an album meet and or exceed all of your expectations, especially if it's one of your most anticipated albums. There have been several albums that I've been anticipating this year and in past years that, I've been hyping them up, I've been looking forward to them, and they're just duds. They let you down. It's like, But moments like this, when you're anticipating a great album, or what you hope to be a great album, and the artist comes through, it's invigorating. It's like, yes, this is why I do this. It's for the love of music. Yeah, please comment, leave a comment. Please share. Let me know what you think. Please subscribe for more of these great reviews. And I'll see you guys at the next video.